You earn well, don't have crazy debts, you even try to save. But at the end of the month, the money simply vanishes. And the worst part? You can't explain exactly where it went. If this sounds familiar, I need to tell you something that very few people realize. Your biggest financial enemy isn't inflation. It's not the market. It's not even that friend who calls you out every week. Your biggest enemy is inside your own mind, operating silently, 24 hours a day, sabotaging every decision you make with money. And the scariest part? You don't even notice it's happening. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the 3 psychological signs that reveal when you're being your own financial saboteur. And look, this isn't some financial coach repeating motivational phrases. This is behavioral science applied to money. I'm going to explain exactly how your mind deceives you, why this happens, and most importantly, what you can do about it. Because here's the truth, nobody tells you. You can have all the financial education in the world, but if you don't understand the psychology behind your decisions, you'll stay stuck in the same place. I'm from Concept Channel, and here we dive deep into the psychology behind money. It's not about earning more. It's about understanding why you do what you do with what you already have. So if you want to finally understand what's happening in your head when it comes to money, stay with me until the end. Because the 3rd sign I'm going to show you is probably the most dangerous one, and I'm sure you'll identify with it. Look at this. Research in behavioral economics shows that up to 70% of our financial decisions are made completely irrationally. That means 7 out of every 10 choices you make with money have nothing to do with logic, math, or planning. They're controlled by invisible psychological mechanisms that were programmed into your mind over years, even decades. And that's exactly where the problem lies. Let's start with the first sign, and this one is perhaps the most fascinating, because it proves how our mind can betray us without us having the slightest idea. I'm talking about cognitive biases. Before you think, that's not me, let me ask you a question. Have you ever bought something on sale that you didn't need just because the discount seemed too good? Or avoided investing in something because everyone says it's risky? If you answered yes to any of these questions, congratulations. You just discovered that you have active cognitive biases. And believe me, everyone does. But what the hell is a cognitive bias? It's basically a mental shortcut that your brain uses to make quick decisions. Think about it like this. Your brain processes millions of pieces of information per second. If it had to rationally analyze every decision, you'd spend hours standing in the supermarket trying to decide which pasta to buy. So it created these shortcuts, these ready-made thought formulas that help you decide quickly. The problem is that when it comes to money, these shortcuts lead you straight into a hole. Let me give you a classic example that you've probably fallen for without realizing: the anchoring effect. Imagine you walk into a store looking for sneakers. The salesperson shows you a model for $1,200. You think it's expensive. Then they show you another one for $400. Suddenly, $400 seems like a great deal, right? But here's the trick. You only think $400 is cheap because your brain used $1,200 as an anchor, as a reference point. If they had shown you a $200 one first, you'd think $400 was expensive. The same thing, the same price, but your perception changes completely. And you know what's worse? Stores, banks, credit card companies, everyone who wants your money knows these biases better than you do. They build entire strategies on top of this. That product that's flying off the shelves? Scarcity trigger. That offer that ends today? Artificial urgency. That influencer talking about how their life changed with a certain investment? Social proof bias. All calculated to make you make impulsive decisions without thinking properly. But there's a bias that's even more dangerous because it confirms everything you already believe. Confirmation bias. Look at this perfect trap. Let's say you believe that investing in the stock market is very risky. You know what your brain will do? It will actively seek any information that confirms this belief. Someone lost money in the stock market? Your brain registers it. News about a market crisis? Your brain highlights it. But when someone makes money investing or there's positive news, your brain simply ignores it. You don't even realize you're filtering reality to fit your belief. And this works both ways. If you believe that spending on experiences is worth more than saving, your brain will show you 1,000 justifications for it. If you think that having money saved is the only form of security, you'll find reasons to never spend. The problem isn't the belief itself. It's that you're making decisions based on a distorted slice of reality, not on complete reality. You're living in an echo of yourself and your money pays the price for it. So how do you know if this is happening to you? Pay attention. Whenever you justify a financial decision with, "I've always done it this way," or "everyone knows that," it's a giant red flag. Whenever you avoid certain conversations about money because you already know how it will end, another sign. Cognitive bias loves routine, loves confirmation, loves you repeating the same patterns. It hates questioning, so if you notice that you can't hear opposing opinions about money without feeling defensive, you can be sure there's a bias operating there. And here's what you can do. Start questioning your own certainties. When you make a financial decision, ask yourself, what evidence do I have against this choice? This forces your brain out of autopilot. It's not comfortable, but it works. Because the first defense against cognitive biases is knowing they exist and are active in you right now, at this exact moment. But now comes the part that many people don't want to hear, but which is absolutely essential to understanding your behavior with money. And this brings me to the second sign, childhood traumas. I know. You might be thinking, here comes cheap psychology wanting to blame everything on childhood. But wait a second. Let me explain why this is much more real and much more present in your life than you imagine. Here's a scientific fact. Between 0 and 7 years of age, your brain is in a phase called the critical period of development. During this phase, you're literally being programmed. Every experience, every strong emotion, every repeated situation creates neural connections that will determine your automatic behaviors for the rest of your life. And this includes your relationship with money. If you lived through situations of scarcity, abundance, conflict, or security involving money during this phase, it was recorded in your mental operating system. Let me give you concrete examples that will help you understand. Imagine a child who grew up in a house where money was the reason for constant fights between parents, arguments about bills, complaints about expenses, tension every time the subject was money. What does this child learn? That money is dangerous, that money causes suffering, that it's better not to think about it. 20 years later, this person is an adult who avoids looking at bank statements, who feels anxiety when talking about finances, who procrastinates on financial decisions, and they have no idea where this comes from, or the opposite. A child who grew up with real scarcity, who saw their parents struggling to put food on the table, who felt the fear of losing their home. What happens? This child develops a deep, visceral fear of not having enough. Then comes the interesting part. This fear can generate two completely opposite behaviors. One is the obsessive hoarder, that person who can never spend anything because they live in fear of returning to scarcity, even when they have money. The other is the compulsive spender, who unconsciously tries to compensate for childhood deprivation by buying everything they couldn't have. And look how crazy this is. Two opposite behaviors come from the same trauma. The difference lies in how the brain decided to protect itself. One chose to ensure it will never be lacking again. The other chose to ensure they'll never feel that deprivation again. But deep down, both are reacting to the fear of the 7-year-old child, not to the reality of the 30-year-old adult. And that's the problem. You're making present decisions with past fear. There's also the trauma of it's never enough. You know that person who earns more and more but never feels satisfied, who always needs the next level, the next achievement. Often this comes from a childhood where love and attention were conditional on performance. You're only valued when you achieve something. Then money becomes a desperate way to prove worth, to be seen, to be loved. But it's a bottomless pit, because no amount will fill an emotional void. And before you think this is only for people who had difficult childhoods, let me tell you about the trauma of abundance without limits. Yes, this exists. Children who grew up having everything, without ever hearing a no, without needing to wait or save. What do they learn? That desire and fulfillment are the same thing. That money is infinite and there will always be more. Then comes adult life. Money isn't infinite, consequences are real. But the brain continues operating on the old programming. Result: debts, impulsive spending, total inability to delay gratification. So how do you identify if this is happening to you? Pay attention to your intense emotional reactions about money. Every time you feel disproportionate fear, paralyzing anxiety, compulsive need, or even anger when dealing with finances, stop and ask, where does this emotion come from? Because intense emotions about money almost always have roots in the past. The present may be the trigger, but the feeling comes from old memories, often unconscious ones. And here's what to do. Start connecting the dots. Think about the messages you received about money as a child. What did your parents say? How did they behave? What emotions were associated with money in your home? You don't necessarily need therapy for this, although it can help a lot. But just the act of bringing this to consciousness already breaks part of the power these traumas have over you. Because while it's unconscious, it controls you. When you bring it to light, you can choose differently. And this brings me to the third and final sign. And this one is probably the most common and most dangerous because it disguises itself as normality. I'm talking about unconscious behavioral patterns, and I bet you're doing at least 3 of them right now without realizing it. Let me explain what I mean by this. Behavioral patterns are habits, automatic routines that you repeat without thinking. And when it comes to money, these patterns are like silent leaks in your pocket. You don't notice you're losing because it's already become part of your routine. Let me give you the most common example. Compensatory emotional spending. You have a stressful day at work, and on the way home you stop at the mall just to take a look. 2 hours later, you left with 3 bags of things you didn't need. What happened? Your brain used shopping as an emotional regulation strategy. You weren't buying products. You were buying a dose of dopamine to compensate for the cortisol from stress. And it works. For about 15 minutes you feel better. But the problem is this becomes a neural loop. Stress generates shopping. Shopping generates temporary pleasure. Financial problems generate more stress. More stress generates more shopping. You've unintentionally created a vicious cycle that has nothing to do with real need and everything to do with dysfunctional emotional regulation, or the automatic reward pattern. You worked all week, it's Friday. You deserve that expensive dinner, that premium delivery, that online purchase. There's nothing wrong with rewarding yourself. The problem is when this becomes an automatism. Every week, every small achievement, every event becomes an excuse to spend. And again, this isn't a conscious decision, it's a behavioral pattern. You don't even realize you're doing it because it's so ingrained that it seems natural. There's also the financial avoidance pattern. How many people do you know who simply don't look at their account balance? Who let bills pile up without opening them? Who avoid talking about money with their partner? This is behavioral avoidance. The brain learned that thinking about money generates discomfort, so it creates a strategy. Don't think about it. Ignore. Postpone. The problem is that money doesn't disappear because you don't look at it. Actually, it gets worse precisely because you're not looking. And there's a pattern that's especially treacherous. Identity spending. It's when you spend to maintain an image of who you think you need to be. You buy brand name clothes even when in debt because you work in a place where you need to make a good impression. You pay the bar tab because you don't want to seem cheap. You live in a place that's too expensive because you can't live in an inferior neighborhood. Look at what's happening. You're sacrificing your real financial health to maintain an imaginary identity. And the worst part? This identity isn't even yours. It's what you think others expect from you. So how do you identify these patterns in yourself? Here's an exercise that works. For 1 week, every time you spend money, write down 3 things. What you bought, what you were feeling before buying, and what you were thinking. It doesn't need to be complex. Just these 3 pieces of information. At the end of the week, you'll see clear patterns. You'll notice that you always spend when you're anxious or bored or procrastinating something important. You'll see that your spending has predictable emotional triggers. And here's the secret to breaking this. Pattern interruption. When you feel the impulse to make that automatic purchase, stop for 10 seconds and ask, what am I really trying to solve here? If the answer is something like, I'm stressed or I'm bored or I want to feel better, you just caught the pattern. And just by catching it, you've already broken the automatism. Now you can consciously choose, okay, I'm stressed, but will buying this really solve it? Or are there other ways to deal with this? The most important thing you need to understand about behavioral patterns is that they're not character flaws. You're not weak, lazy, or irresponsible. You're human. Your brain is doing exactly what brains do, creating shortcuts to save energy. The problem is these shortcuts were created for a different context, and now they're hurting you. The good news is that patterns can be rewritten. It's difficult, takes time, requires conscious repetition, but it's totally possible. And look, before we wrap up, I need to tell you something important. I showed you 3 signs of financial sabotage: cognitive biases that distort your perception, childhood traumas that programmed your automatic reactions, and behavioral patterns that you repeat without realizing. But here's the truth. Identifying the problem is just the first step. The second step, which is the most important, is having compassion for yourself. Because when you understand that you're not messing up on purpose, that your brain is just following old programming, it becomes easier to change without guilt. Financial sabotage isn't intentional. Nobody wakes up in the morning and decides, today I'm going to destroy my financial life. But it happens because you're operating on autopilot, with systems that were installed a long time ago and were never updated. And here's the good part. Just as you learn these patterns, you can unlearn them. Just as your brain created these connections, it can create new ones. Neuroplasticity is real. Change is possible, but it starts with awareness. So I want you to do something now. Think about which of these 3 signs resonated most with you. Was it cognitive biases? Did you realize you make decisions based on wrong mental shortcuts? Was it childhood traumas? Did you connect some current emotion with a memory from the past? Or was it behavioral patterns? Did you recognize that you're stuck in an automatic cycle? Be honest with yourself, because this honesty is the first step toward real change. And if you want to deepen this topic, because what I've said here is just the surface, leave your comments saying which of these 3 signs you most identified with and why. Because this helps you consolidate learning and helps us create content increasingly targeted to what you really need. Here at Concept Channel, we don't just want to inform, we want to transform. And transformation begins with deep understanding. If this video made sense to you, if you had any insight, any twinge of recognition, leave a like. It's not just to help the channel, although that helps a lot. It's because this like is a commitment to yourself that you're paying attention, that you're willing to look at these issues. And subscribe to the channel, because we're going to continue dissecting the psychology behind money in ways you've never seen before. In the coming weeks, we're going to talk about how to reprogram your beliefs about money, about the 3 types of financial personality, and how each one sabotages differently, and about how to create a financial system that works with your psychology, not against it. Because look, you can have all the spreadsheets in the world, but if you don't understand your mind, you'll stay stuck. And I don't want you to stay stuck. Thank you for staying until here. This shows that you're truly committed to understanding your relationship with money, and that already puts you ahead of 90% of people. Remember, awareness is power. You just gained awareness about 3 invisible forms of sabotage. Now you have the power to do differently. See you in the next video. Until then, question your patterns, investigate your emotions, and most importantly, have compassion for yourself on this journey.